Everywhere I'm going, I'm talking about love. When we talk about communication of one person to another person, we talk about love, making that possible. When we talk about healing, we talk about love being the X factor in healing. When we talk about relationships and communication, we talk about love as the factor that makes these things work. And even when we talk about creation itself, according to the source, in the beginning, God expressed himself. And that expression of God was love. And God took love and made the world out of it. And everything that was made out of that. And it is the prime energy of the universe, more powerful than anything else. So we talk about love as being the X factor in creation, the X factor in healing, the X factor in communication, in relationships, in almost everything that is positive and growing. But when we talk about that, it suddenly occurs to me once in a while, most people don't know what love is. And so you've done all this talking about this is love and that's love and you must have love for this, and people are hearing their own concepts of love. What really is it? How do we cultivate love? How do we recognize love and use it? I've listed these things on the blackboard because I find these things substituting for love in so many relationships. The first one, dishonesty as love. I've watched situations in which one person watching another person functioning would see a mistake that that person is making and could have helped him, except, well, that would be a little harsh. That would be demanding on my relationship. I want that person to love me, and I want to be loving to him. So I tell him that's all right. But I noticed to other people that it was not all right. Dishonesty as love. A situation like that happened in the fellowship so recently, and it made such a strong impression on me that I've been watching in relationships to see where dishonesty was called love. And I became surprised to see how many times it happened. I watched a man who was telling me what a poor job one of our employees was doing. And at the same time was going to that employee and saying, oh, well, your only problem is that Paul Solomon is being too hard on you. And then I talked to both of them. The man who was doing the criticizing, I said, why are you doing it this way? He says, well, I don't believe in doing things the way you're doing. That's harsh. We need to be loving in our relationships. What a beautiful thing he was saying. We need to be loving in our relationships. So he was being loving to that young man. He was being dishonest. How often in the name of love are we dishonest? Are we afraid to communicate the truth and to bring our relationship to truth because we care enough to be honest? You know, the interesting thing about our relationship to one another on this plane is that God works through us. When God wants to cause us to grow, he uses one of us to teach another constantly. The great teacher is inside. And when we get in touch with this inner teacher and get to know him, then we grow from listening to him. Now, a lot of people want to make substitutes for that. We want to put the teachers outside. We want to have an incarnate master to give us our teaching. But the truth is, the only thing that an incarnate teacher can teach us is where to find the real teacher. That's the only thing that he can teach us. And when the inner teacher, the real teacher, is awakened, then how do we know it's him? By noticing that what happens within happens without as well. Or to say it another way, when I begin to get in touch with my inner teacher in meditation, when I go through the gardens and come to that place where I listen to a still, small, quiet voice, and I get a communication from that voice, I've made contact, perhaps, with an inner teacher. I've made contact with something inside. Now, how do I know that it isn't ego? How do I know that it isn't fantasy? How do I know that it isn't a discarnate being, somebody who was alive and has left the body and wants very much to manipulate me? How can I know that it actually is the inner teacher? There is a way you can know. You can know by listening to what is being communicated in that meditation, and then the next day watching the situations in your life itself. And assume this: every person who enters my life today, every person, was carefully screened by my inner teacher. And every one of them was carefully selected to harmonize with what my inner teacher told me in meditation. And if what is coming within in meditation and what is happening in my everyday life out there are in disharmony, there's something wrong. If my inner teacher, if this inner voice that I'm listening to is telling me how well I'm handling things and is being very encouraging about this step that I'm to make, and then the next morning I go and I start to work with this thing and it all blows up in my face, there's something wrong. The inner teacher and everyday life harmonize together in such a way that every incident in your life today, if you could get as practical as this: when we finish this service and you get up to leave, notice who the first person is that you speak to, and assume that that wasn't by accident, that your teacher selected that particular person and put him there, and then go on to the next situation and the next and the next, and look out for the emotional situations. And know that anything that happens to you today was allowed to happen because you had a need to experience it. And if it pushed a button in you, then the thing that lesson let you know is that the button is there. Your inner teacher is working through the people around you. We are one another's teachers in the external. And we cannot help but be a reflection of one another's teachers on the internal. But on the other hand, if we are so concerned that another find us smiling and placid and warm and never really working with one another, never caring enough to point out those things that are building, that can cause one another to grow, we miss that opportunity to be a teacher. Are you dishonest in love relationships? Are you honest enough to let people know how you see them, and at the same time not use that opportunity of honesty to get out some of your hostility? Because it works two ways. It's a two-edged sword. If you love enough, you'll say to those around you, perhaps you should work on this. But at the same time, if your honesty, if what you're calling honesty in love is an opportunity to express your hostility or your jealousy or these other things, that's the other side of the sword. Real love must care enough to help one another grow, must care enough to be honest in relationships. And let's move on. Leaching as love. This is really common in love relationships because of this. There are so few people in our culture who have grown up knowing it is all right to love me. Most people are love-starved. We've been taught in our culture, especially men, especially fathers, it's not masculine to love. It's not masculine to express your love. And so we as men take it for granted that others know that we love them. Or we find little ways to sort of hint and suggest, I love you, without ever really saying it. Or without being warm enough to show it. And as a result of that, we have children growing up never feeling quite sure that they're loved. And so they enter relationships that they think are love relationships, when they're really entering relationships to get someone else to prove his love for self. If I don't love myself, I have a great need to be loved. And when I enter a love relationship, I'm going to be trying to get you to prove that you love me constantly, which puts a drain on the relationship. Now look at almost any marriage, and you'll find a drain going one way or the other. One of the partners is not sure that he's loved, and he is constantly doing things to get the other to prove that he does love. That's leeching in love relationships. And it isn't done just in marriage relationships. It's done in friendship relationships. It's done in teacher-student relationships. How often I run into this situation of having dozens of people come and say, I don't know why people monopolize so much of your time. I don't know why people don't just let you have a rest. Could I have a few minutes of your time? Just a few minutes. I mean, I only want about 2 minutes. Leeching in love relationships usually comes from the fact that I haven't found myself worthy. I haven't found myself lovable. But I want to find someone who loves and get him to love me to prove that I'm lovable. And so I take from someone else what I don't have. And I think in taking it that I give. But instead it becomes a drain. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Passion as love. That's probably the most common in our culture because we're taught it at every hand. That love is supposed to be something that is based on an excitement, a chemistry that happens between two people. And so in our culture, we have people who go and find someone else exciting to them. Usually, somebody who represents something to them. In other words, a lady looks at a man and thinks, oh, he's mysterious. He's so strong. He's so different from other men. And she finds that exciting, stimulating. There's a passion in there. And so she falls in love with that, forms a relationship, and in a short time finds that, of course, he's just another man. The passion was built in that image that she had of him, which never was him in the first place. So what happens? What happens is the lady comes to me and says, there's no more magic in our marriage. It isn't exciting anymore. I mean, isn't a marriage relationship supposed to be exciting? Shouldn't I go and find someone else now that he's not exciting anymore? He doesn't turn me on anymore. The fact is, he never did. What she thought he was turned her on in the beginning, and he never was that. And he probably would have been absolutely shocked if he had known that she thought he was that, because he never could have been that, probably. Passion is built like that because passion is always directed toward my need. What I feel passionate about is a fantasy that I have built in my own mind, and any kind of love relationship, any love relationship that is built on passion is built on my personal need, not thinking of the other person at all. So it isn't even a relationship between two people. It is a self-satisfaction of one person. And we'll talk about that some more in a bit. Protectiveness as love. Here's another common expression of what people think is love, because so many people, especially teachers, and you teachers that are here, hear me. Teachers feel so obligated to make certain that the student learns, and to make certain that the student learns and expresses their own ideas and their feelings and not make mistakes. So teachers and mothers and fathers and husbands and wives who are doing this to one another watch to make sure that this other person doesn't make the mistakes that they have made, perhaps, or the mistakes that the teacher thinks the student is about to make. Protectiveness always wants to make certain that the other person never gets to express what they really are. Teachers think that they're doing students a favor by making certain that they express what the teacher wants them to express, even though that's not what they are and that's not what they feel inside. This is my ideal. A student must be this and this and this. And so you'd better show this image and act as if you are this in order to please me, because I want to make sure that you don't make mistakes. I want to make sure that you don't get hurt. I want to make sure that you are these things. This kind of protectiveness that doesn't allow a person to express himself and to be what he is, keeping people from making mistakes. And what really happens is that the child grows up, or the wife who is protected by the husband, or the husband protected by the wife, becomes a bland, dissatisfied person with a lot of things bottled up inside, and someday it explodes. And what really builds in the other half of the relationship is a resentment that finally comes to the surface. You know, I'm talking about these things this morning, and as I'm talking about them, I can feel a little bit of uncomfortable feeling going around here and there. And I want to explain that I'm talking about it because I experience it so much, and I experience it among us. So we're getting down to earth and down to practicalities today, and sort of calling a spade, perhaps. Because these things are going on in marriages, in families, in relationships, right here among us. And it's probably a good time to get a feeling for it and look at it, maybe take the lid off of it, and see how many of these little ghosts I can find in my relationship. What is your relationship built on? Take a good look at it and find out. See how you formed them. And don't get paranoid if you formed them wrong. Most of us did. Most of us have formed wrong relationships, which doesn't necessarily mean the relationship can't work. There's a time that a wrong relationship can be changed into a right relationship, and the essence of what we're going to share this morning is how to do that. But before we do that, let's find out what the wrong relationships are and see if we can take the lids off that. Possessiveness as love. Obviously, some of these flow from one into the other, and in love relationships, there very often are 3 or more of these, or maybe all of them as a part of a single relationship. When a person is protective, he is also probably possessive. Trying to make sure, now here's one that you're going to be familiar with, I'm afraid. Trying to make sure that if your partner is really enjoying himself, that it is either because he's doing something that you suggested that he do, or that you are causing him to enjoy himself. But what you really hope is it's not something that has absolutely nothing to do with you if he's enjoying himself. If he's enjoying himself, it should be because you are causing him to enjoy himself. You should have something to do with it. Possessiveness and jealousy, of course, go hand in hand. Wanting to see everything that a person does, make sure, in the name of love, how many things do we do in the name of love that are exactly the opposite of love? Containing a person, holding a person, keeping them from expressing, and being possessive because we say, but I love them too much to let them go. We say that of our children. You know, a lot of our protectiveness and possessiveness and manipulation in love comes, frankly, from not being able to trust God. God built on this earth a school, a great school, a school of the mysteries, designed in such a way that a person growing will find every single lesson that he needs to learn presented to him in his life. God not only designed a school here, but he sent teachers. And every single one of us, each one of you, has an individual, personal, loving, caring teacher. One of the most interesting things about that loving teacher that you have is he's not possessive and he's not protective. He will let you break your leg just anytime you want to. Now, parents decide that they know better than God how to run this school, so they hold the children in rather than letting them experience the school. Very often, if we let our child or our husband or our wife taste of what we are protecting them against, they would find for themselves what's wrong with it and would be taught by that inner teacher. But if we protect them too much, that inner teacher is not developed, and a relationship of dependence is grown. And that school of life then can't work because of the protectiveness and the possessiveness. Manipulation as love. In relationships of protectiveness and possessiveness, there's nearly always manipulation. And of course, in the dishonesty as love, there's manipulation too. And in the leeching, probably, all of these usually wind up with manipulation. How does manipulation work in love? You've seen it. You've seen people say, well, if you loved me, you wouldn't do that. If you really cared for me, you wouldn't spend your time in those places, doing those things, being with those people. If you really cared for me, you'd be interested in the things I'm interested in. If you really cared for them, you wouldn't say that. Get in touch with whether you have been on either side of one of these kind of relationships, using these negatives as love, claiming that they are love. And then let's talk for a moment about how to experience the other side of love, or what love really is. And how can we correct a relationship, or how can we build a love relationship that is based on love and not one of these negatives. The first step in building a strong, positive, loving relationship is to get in touch with who you are and what you are in relation to your source. The first thing to notice in building that relationship is how carefully you were made. Your Creator, you're a pretty powerful person. You're a person who occupies a body that you made. There was a you before that physical body existed. There was a consciousness and intelligence that made decisions about that body that you're in. You decided the color of your hair and eyes and the weaknesses and strengths that went into that body. You created the body, and it's a pretty delicate instrument, pretty special instrument. Anybody that can create something like that, I'm impressed. You're a pretty good creator. And the interesting thing is, you create the other things that are happening around you in your life every day. If you can begin to recognize what you are and who you are in your relationship to the source. Recognize, for example, you have an ability to affect people around you. You have an ability to actually affect the body chemistry in the people around you. When you feel really good, and you're really beaming, and you're up, and you're filled with a lot of joy, and you meet other people around you, they're affected by that, they're lifted, they're encouraged. Or, as another example, if you simply went to somebody at the end of this service, somebody that you really care about, somebody who has helped you in some way, if you went to somebody and said, you know, you're really beautiful. You've really meant something to me. I feel really fortunate to know you. You know what you'd do to the blood chemistry of that person? You know how much you can affect people around you if you just express the truth, just the simple truth. How many people are there in this fellowship who you have been fortunate to know? Think of the people around you that there would be a little chunk missing out of your life if that person weren't there. Now, when did you last say so? We have a tendency to think that if other people are beautiful, that they know it. We have a tendency to think that these people around us, these lovely, wonderful people, know that they're lovely and wonderful and beautiful. But you know what? They don't. Most of them don't. Most of them would be surprised if they knew how much they'd meant to you. If you'd tell them, it'd make a considerable difference. And what I'm trying to say to you is you are a powerful, creative being, and the fact is, you're beautiful. Absolutely, perfectly beautiful. And there aren't any exceptions to that. As I go around to each one of you personally, don't hear this as a group, hear it as an individual. And know I'm telling you, you're beautiful. You're a person who can affect other people with beauty, and your love is worth having. Your love is something precious. And people who receive your love are fortunate people. Now, if you can actually know that, don't just hear me saying that as my opinion. I would like you to know that as your opinion of you, and here's why. If you can begin to recognize your own value as an individual, if you can look at this body that you've made and say, yes, as a matter of fact, it is complicated, it is delicate, it is an absolute masterpiece. It functions well to provide me with every lesson that I need, even when there is weakness, even when there is dis-ease. I can recognize from that my body as a communication device is trying to tell me something. Even then, it is operating beautifully and perfectly, even when I call it diseased or sick. Your body is a valuable, beautiful instrument that you have created and serves you beautifully. Recognize it. What I am is a beautiful, creative being. I am worthwhile. My love is worth having. My love is precious. It is important. People who receive it are fortunate to receive it. Know that. And then know this as well. The creative being, the spark of God, the spark of creativity, or God within me that created my body, loved me. I can see, I can feel, I can experience that from being in this body and seeing how responsive it is to my needs. If I look around me at life, I can see how much the Source loves me by putting you in my life for me to respond to. For carefully putting in my life every day everyone that I need to respond to by responding to my weaknesses. Even those people who are challenges in my life are put there carefully selected by the Source of my being. Then there is a lover in me who loves me a lot. If I can come to the point of loving what I am, loving my body because it is serving me well, loving my ability to create and respond to life, loving the lover that is within me and feeling loved by all of that, I have made the first step toward forming a love relationship. The first step in forming a love relationship is being whole and complete and loved, even if no one else loves me. I must in myself feel whole and complete and loved. Good about myself. Good about life. Good about my relationship with the source of my being. I must do that first. Even if no one else expresses love for me, I must feel secure that I am loved. Now, if I feel that, I'm ready to form a relationship. And if I'm not sure that I am loved, then when I form a relationship with somebody else, I'm going to be requiring of them that they let me know that I am loved, and I'm going to be a leech in the relationship. In fact, I am likely to be so convinced that I am not lovely that in that relationship, I'm likely to sabotage the relationship. As this person tells me, I love you, I'm going to say to him subconsciously, oh yeah, try this. And I will do something rotten to him that will challenge his love for me, and I'll sabotage my own relationship because I want to know, do you really love me enough to say you love me when I'm doing this to you? Happens all the time in relationships. Just watch it. Watch it in your own and see if you don't sabotage relationships and then require the other person to love you in spite of your sabotage. Why? Because I enter a relationship feeling, if he ever finds out what I really am, I wonder if he'll still love me. I mean, if he really gets to know me. So I enter a relationship paranoid in the relationship. Not in love with myself, not feeling that what I am is lovely and deserving of love. And then I go through a whole lifetime putting that other person through the pain of trying to love someone that I don't even find lovely. Happens all the time. Look at yourself. We've been brought up, unfortunately, in an irrational culture. Now, we may as well face that because it's true. We're brought up in a culture that tells us, don't love yourself. It isn't nice to love yourself. Love other people. And that is an absolute impossibility. You cannot love others until you love yourself. A person who loves himself, a person who recognizes his value and his worth and is loved can enter a love relationship saying, I love you. And that means I care for you exactly as you are and recognize your right to be exactly what you are, not requiring of you that you change or meet any of my expectations. I love you exactly as you are. And even if you don't love me in return, I still love you. The only person who can say that is one who is already secure in his love. A person who is loved can enter a love relationship and say, I love you without requiring that you love me in return. Even if you aren't capable of loving me in return, I'll know that that has nothing to do with me anyway. It only has to do with your own insecurity. And I love you enough to want to see you grow into security in your own love. And then, of course, you'll love me. People who take personally other people's lack of love for them simply don't understand what's going on anyway. Anyone who doesn't love me is only experiencing a problem with himself. It really has nothing to do with me. It only has to do with something that he thought that he saw in me that probably wasn't there in the first place. That was a reflection of something that he didn't like in himself, that was demonstrated to him through me by some little phrase that I said or some little movement that I made. And it has totally to do with his relationship with himself. So how can I be offended? How can I be offended if a person fails to recognize what I really am? Or if a person fails to love me? I am loved. There is no one that can deprive me of that. I'm not only loved, I'm loved enough. sufficiently for all my needs. And so are you. And there just isn't any reason to deprive yourself of the beauty of feeling and experiencing that. Because it's just simply true. And you know, the interesting thing is, people who lack love, people who are love-starved, go out and make very obvious the fact that they're seeking to be loved. But they also make very obvious the fact that they don't feel loved. And so they put out a double message. I want you to love me, but I bet you won't. I want you to love me, but I'm going to make sure that you notice how unloved I am, and how ugly I am, and how depraved I am, because I'm not being loved. People who are not loved don't usually appear to be very beautiful. But then, if people grow into being loved, and they become satisfied and secure and comfortable in that love, then there's something that beams in their face, and people just start loving them. Those people who need love so much, if they could just discover it inside themselves, then from outside, that outside love that they want so much would just be showered on them. It's amazing what happens. I feel that I can speak on this subject with a great deal of authority, just simply because I spent so much time feeling unloved. Absolutely sure that I wasn't lovable. I used to think I was ugly. Can you imagine? And I thought my parents didn't love me. I thought my family didn't love me. I mean, nobody loved me. And as a matter of fact, I entered relationships fully expecting to be rejected. And I was. Love relationships, family relationships, job relationships. Even in the army, I never expected to get promoted, and I didn't. I didn't feel loved. And I always thought that if anybody did show love for me, it's just because they didn't understand me. If they really got to know me, they wouldn't love me either. I didn't love me. I was a bit ashamed of what I was. I was absolutely certain that I had failed God. I had failed my family. I had failed myself. I had failed in marriage. I had failed everything. And I was, perfectly prepared to be a failure in the next thing. Oh, I knew I could make a success for a while, but that's because people didn't know I was a failure. And then I discovered it's all right to love me, and in fact, if I don't, nobody else will. It sort of started when I discovered every time I'm in love with somebody, I really pour it on and I become successful for a while. I start doing things well. I start making money. I start feeling better. All this. I become successful for that other person. But if I don't have anybody to be successful for, I'm not successful at all. And when I realized that, then the source told me, and this was in the very first few months that the source was communicating, the source once said to me, it's all right to be successful for you. Why don't you do it for yourself? And it was a whole new idea. Even that it was all right was a shock to me. The idea that it was all right to be successful for me, to do anything for me, to buy things for me. When I saw nice things, I would always say, gee, wouldn't my sister like that? Or wouldn't my brother like that? Wouldn't my mother like that? But never occurred, what about me? Why don't you buy something for you? Never felt that was all right. Until I began to realize that I wasn't loving any of those other people. I wasn't loving in marriage. I wasn't loving in my family. I wasn't loving in those relationships where I was blaming people for not loving me in return. I was running around thinking, I'm the most loving person in the world. Why don't people love me? I'm always buying things for people, doing things for people. You know, I always dated the ugliest girl in the class. Because she needed somebody. Or at least that was the excuse that I told me. I was the most loving person around. Then why doesn't anybody love me? Because frankly, I was a leech. I was trying to get somebody to love something that I didn't find worthy of love. That's dishonest, isn't it? It doesn't come to me as any surprise that other people do this. People do it all the time. I see it in relationships. I see it in people forming relationships with me. I see people come to me asking me questions, fully expecting to be rejected. And their rejection sign is hanging out. You can see it. It's big. It's bold. I know you're going to reject me, and I'm going to resent it too. You may as well know that before I even ask this question. People who don't love themselves. You must love what God has given you the care of, as if it were a child, a baby, born to you, given into your care to raise. And I'm not speaking of anyone else. I'm speaking of the preciousness of your heart, yourself, the essence of what you really are. If you can fall in love with that as if it were a baby, what you are is a child God growing to be what his Father is. A baby given into your care to nourish, to notice that it's beautiful. And the second that you begin to express that to other people, if in relationships, if in your family relationships, in your love relationship at home, regardless of how it was built, if right now you can quit requiring of that relationship, that it feed you, and you instead become whole within yourself, loved totally, with or without that relationship, I am loved. With or without the satisfaction, the excitement, or anything else that I can get from that relationship, I am loved. I am secure, I am whole, I am all right. And my love is worth having. What I put into this relationship, what I give in this relationship is beautiful and good and worthwhile. Then I will give it knowing that what I'm giving is precious, but without requiring that anyone else will notice how precious it is. If another person is not grown enough, is not mature enough to recognize that, that's all right. That doesn't decrease the value of what I give. I give freely without requiring that someone notice the value of what I give. Don't require that in a love relationship, any love relationship. Those people who need your love most are not capable of returning it. So don't give kind for kind. Just give love. But what about me? You'll be loved within yourself, and make that enough. Form your love relationship with your soulmate. And your relationship with the other person on this plane will take care of itself. And what is your soulmate? That part of you that never descended into matter. The part of you that is God, always has been, and has been with God and in his bosom all this time. Form your relationship with the other half of you, your soulmate. And then your life mate on this plane will not be required to return that to you. And you can instead nourish. Now, of course, that other person will grow into a new relationship when you quit making demands on the relationship. Well, what about divorce? What about separation? What about getting out of the relationship if it isn't working? Well, it's all right, honey, if you want to come back and do it again. Just don't get into any ideas that divorce ends anything. It only means that unless you handled that relationship beautifully, you're going to get another chance. That's just the way the universe works. It's just universal law, and it's going to happen, and I can't repeal the law. Nor can you. So don't feel that you are through with the relationship because you got a bill of divorcement. That only means that you don't have to deal with it right now. That only means that you got a reprieve for a little while. But you're still going to have to come back and deal with everything in that relationship that was a challenge to you. Everything that didn't work out must be worked out. It doesn't mean that it has to be in a future lifetime. It can be right now. It doesn't mean that it has to be with that person either. All karma is within you. All karma is with yourself and the source of your being, not with that other person. Work it out within you and become a different kind of person than the one who couldn't handle that relationship. Become a new kind of person who could handle all the challenges of that relationship, and you won't need to have the relationship to prove it. But all of that must come from within you, from growing inside yourself, from falling in love with the source of your being and with his handiwork. Not only love God, but love God, what God has manifested through you. You know, for me to say, well, she's such a beautiful person. He has such great talent. All these people, you know, look what God did for them. But I'm not much. I just don't have, I don't have any talent. I can't accomplish anything. I'm not very much. Listen. The source of your being, the creative source, created for you a delicate, beautiful, complicated instrument. For you to say that's not much is an absolute insult. A part of self-love is simple appreciation for the tools that God gave you to manifest in this time. And besides that, what is a brilliant talent? Being able to perform on the concert stage, being able to give readings or lecture and speak before great crowds of people. What's really valuable? What's really the most valuable thing, the most important thing? What does this world need right now more than anything else? You want to know? Needs people who can look at one another and say, you're absolutely beautiful. This world is nicer because you're here. I'm glad I know you. People who can help lift other people and encourage them and make them feel better. And you know what? You've got that talent. You've got that talent. The most important talent in this world. You've got it. You have that ability. That makes you as beautiful as any being that ever walked on earth, if you use it. You can be to someone today the most beautiful person they've seen today by giving to them your beauty, by giving to them an expression of your love. But you know what? That's hard to do unless you're secure in your love. I mean, it's really hard to go up to somebody else and say, you're really beautiful, I really care about you, because we're afraid that person's going to think I'm crazy. I'm going to be afraid of that if I'm not in love with me. I mean, if I'm afraid of being rejected, I'm going to be afraid of being bold enough to love. You know, it's quite a paradox. It's quite a vicious cycle. If I'm not loved, I can't love. If I don't love myself, I can't give love to others. And I have to give love to others in order to feel loved myself. Where do I start? Where do I get this wheel turning in the other direction? Might take some boldness to get the wheel turning in the other direction. Begin to notice today, just make it a project. Begin to notice how much effect you can have on other people if you make it a project to make other people feel better. And if you work on it all week, making it a project in your life to see how many people you can make feel better. When you walk into a restaurant and see a waitress, be the person who made her day. When you walk into a grocery store and deal with a clerk, be the person who made that day more beautiful for that clerk. You can do it. You have that ability. And that ability is what this world needs more than anything else right now. And if we can start an epidemic, we can do something this world needs done, especially Virginia Beach. And the reason, especially Virginia Beach, is because you were put here to do it. This is the place that is especially important for you to begin to change now. And it's nice enough to consider the concept and say, well, maybe we could make a little difference. How much difference could we make? Frankly, I believe we can change the earth. And it won't take but a handful. Just a handful of people could change the consciousness of the earth if they began to love what they are, love the source of their being, and give that love freely to other people. It's contagious, it's infectious, and if we start it, it's going to spread. I want to invite you to fall in love with yourself this morning. And being in love with what you are, with the manifestation of God in you, being in love with yourself and with God, begin to give that love to other people this morning. Begin to heal your love relationship with your husband or wife, with your children, with your parents, with other people around you, knowing that you may find some negative response. You may very well. But that doesn't deprive you of being loved. Don't be the victim in the relationship. Be loved and secure, and keep giving love to those who find it very difficult to receive. And then know, if someone snaps back, if someone returns to you hurt and anger for your love, then know this: you are a healer who has just discovered his patient and the patient's symptoms. That's all. If he can't love in return, it's just because he needs to be healed, and all you can do is give him more of love. Knowing that you are loved, he can't cause any hurt in you if you're loved. He can't deprive you of love if you have love. So you can't be made a victim. But you can give love as a cause until he begins to experience and change and feel it. There's the challenge. If you can become the cause and not the victim, if you can become love and express it, then you can change the earth that you live in. Thanks for sharing.